There is something dangerous about returning to what God has already delivered you from. Going back is not just a step in the wrong direction. It is rebellion against progress. When you revisit what God told you to leave, you insult his wisdom. You see, the past has a way of dressing itself in nostalgia, making you forget the pain, the confusion, and emotional weight that once drained your purpose. Memory can be deceptive. The enemy of your destiny will always try to remind you of what was, to blind you from what could be. Let me ask you a question. Why do you think God allowed it to end in the first place? Why did he close that door? If it was part of your future, it would not be behind you. The very fact that it's called your past means it no longer fits where you're going. Don't let loneliness trick you into reattaching yourself to what was toxic. Don't let impatience make you believe that familiarity is better than freedom. God doesn't free you from something to watch you crawl back and ask for the chains again. You are not designed to be bound to cycles. You were created for progress, for purpose, for growth. And anything and anyone that keeps dragging you into an old version of yourself is not a part of your divine assignment. Relationships are not just emotional, they are spiritual alignments. If someone pulls you away from clarity, peace, purpose, and obedience to God, then their presence is costing you more than you realize. Some people are not wrong, they're just wrong for your calling. Some relationships aren't evil, they're just distractions. And distraction is dangerous because it looks harmless. What it drains you slowly. You start shrinking your vision just to keep their company. You silence your voice to keep their approval. You postpone your growth to preserve their comfort. But you're not called to fit where you've already outgrown. What God has for you is not behind you, it's ahead. And if you keep turning around, you'll miss what's in front of you. Never return to what God has already freed you from. When God delivers you from something, it means he has evaluated its impact on your purpose and declared it unfit for your destiny. He doesn't pull you out of a situation to embarrass you or isolate you. He pulls you out because he sees what you cannot. He sees the hidden weights, the spiritual distractions, the emotional strongholds that were slowly eroding your identity. And when he says enough, it's not a suggestion, it's a divine shift. To go back to what he pulled you out of is to question his judgment and resist his grace. There's a reason why chains are broken. Freedom is not just about leaving a place, it's about stepping into a new level of awareness, responsibility, and divine alignment. But the danger many people face is that they leave physically, but remain connected emotionally. They leave the relationship, but their heart is still negotiating with the past. They walk away, but the soul keeps looking back like Lot's wife, frozen in memory, stuck in emotion, paralyzed by attachment. And that's where many people fall. Not because God didn't set them free, but because they didn't stay free. Freedom requires discipline. It demands that you guard your mind, your emotions, and your atmosphere. It means closing the door so tight that the wind of temptation can't even slip through. Old relationships often come knocking with new language, but the same broken patterns. The smile may be sweeter. The tone may be softer. The words may sound more spiritual, but the spirit behind it is still carrying the same confusion. Don't be deceived by familiarity. Just because it feels comfortable doesn't mean it's correct. Just because it once made you feel seen doesn't mean it was sent. Sometimes God will allow a relationship to end not because the person was evil, but because the connection became toxic. It began to consume your peace, distort your identity, and drain your energy. And God, in his mercy, will not allow what's killing you to stay connected to you. He will disturb your comfort to preserve your calling. That's why it's dangerous to return to what God closed, because you risk reopening wounds that were already healing. You risk re-entering a storm He already rescued you from. You risk falling back into a version of yourself you fought to escape. People often go back because they confuse closure with restoration. Closure doesn't mean revisiting the mess to make sense of it. Closure means accepting what God allowed and moving forward with clarity. Restoration is only possible when both hearts are submitted to God and aligned with His timing and purpose. If that's not the case, going back is not restoration, it's regression. It's spiritual sabotage disguised as a second chance. God will never take you backward to grow you forward. He always moves you in the direction of promise, not comfort. And promise always requires separation. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is not walk away, but stay away. That's where the real strength is. Anyone can leave a situation, but staying away, especially when the past comes back wrapped in sweet words and old memories, that takes obedience. That takes vision. That takes maturity. You have to decide, do you want comfort or do you want calling? Because you can't have both. The old relationship may have moments of peace, but it costs you too much purpose. It may have history, but history without destiny is just wasted time. Don't let your heart write a contract that your spirit can't survive. God freed you not to punish you, but to protect what He placed inside of you. That's why you must never go back. Not even for closure, not even for one last conversation. When God says it's over, trust that it's not just the end, it's the beginning of what He's really been trying to give you all along. So, honor your freedom, guard your future, and walk like someone who knows they've been delivered. The past cannot support your future. That's not just a motivational phrase, it's a spiritual law. Your future is not built on memories, it's built on vision. And the moment you try to use your past as the foundation for your next chapter, you begin constructing your destiny on something that no longer has the strength to hold you. The reason God separated you from certain people and places is because they were no longer capable of sustaining the weight of who you are becoming. What once served you in a previous season can become a burden in the next if you carry it beyond its expiration date. Relationships that once felt right may no longer be relevant, not because they were evil, but because they were seasonal. And if you don't understand the difference between seasonal and eternal, you'll try to drag something forward that God already labeled as complete. There are people who were part of your development, not your destiny. They helped you grow, they taught you lessons, they even held your hand during dark times, but that doesn't mean they're meant to walk with you into your next level. You see, your future requires new agreements, new language, new mindsets, and many times old relationships are rooted in old versions of you. Versions that were insecure, unclear, dependent, or distracted. And when you try to bring those people into your new season, they don't know how to relate to who you're becoming. So what do? They pull you back to who you were. They remind you of your past, not because they're malicious, but because that's the only part of you they understand. And if you're not spiritually aware, you'll start shrinking yourself to fit back into an environment that no longer fits your calling. That's why the past cannot support your future. It lacks the structure, the alignment, and the spiritual maturity to carry your next assignment. God gives you glimpses of the future so that you won't settle for the comfort of the past. He shows you what's possible so you don't return to what's familiar. And the more He reveals about your purpose, the more you must protect yourself from the urge to regress. You cannot walk into destiny while holding hands with dysfunction. You can't soar while staying emotionally entangled in places where you were once broken. The reason some people struggle to move forward is because they're trying to balance both. They want the future God promised, but they still entertain the past they prayed to be free from. That double-mindedness creates spiritual confusion. It clutters your heart and delays your progress. The truth is, some old relationships feel emotionally comfortable because they don't challenge your growth. They let you stay the same. But your future demands transformation. It demands that you rise, that you break patterns, that you elevate your thoughts, your boundaries, and your values. And anything or anyone that tries to keep you in cycles of confusion, compromise, or emotional instability is not from God. The Lord is not the author of chaos. He's the author of clarity, of peace, of purpose. Let's be honest, letting go is hard, but holding on to what no longer serves your purpose is harder in the long run. You are not created to recycle broken seasons. You are created to build, to multiply, to impact. That means you need space. Mental space, emotional space, spiritual space. And the past takes up too much of that space when you keep revisiting it through old conversations, old attachments, and old soul ties. God will never ask you to water a plant He already uprooted. If He removed it, it's because it could not grow in the soil of your future. Stop trying to replant it. Your next season needs fresh roots, fresh vision, and fresh relationships that align with where God is taking you, not where you've already been. So close the chapter with gratitude, but don't carry it forward. The future is calling, and it's not looking back. Familiarity is not a reason to tolerate dysfunction. Just because something feels familiar doesn't mean it's healthy. We often mistake comfort for confirmation, thinking that if a person or relationship feels known, it must be right. But comfort can be deceptive. It can lure you into patterns that look safe but are slowly strangling your growth. The soul can grow attached to dysfunction simply because it has existed in it for so long. That doesn't make the environment right. It just means the soul forgot what peace feels like. The truth is, many people return to old relationships not out of love but out of comfort. The mind begins to play tricks, saying, at least I knew how to manage that pain, or they weren't all bad. And while that may be partially true, God never called you to manage pain. He called you to walk in freedom. He never asked you to settle for moments of relief in places where your spirit is dying slowly. Familiarity makes us tolerate behavior we would never accept from a stranger. We begin to excuse things like dishonor, inconsistency, manipulation, and emotional instability simply because we have a history with the person. But history is not enough reason to ignore your destiny. You have to understand that dysfunction, even when it feels normal, is still dysfunction. When you stay in environments that constantly drain you, confuse you, or leave you questioning your worth, you begin to lose your sense of identity. And identity confusion is one of the enemy's favorite strategies. Because if you forget who you are, you'll settle for anything just to feel connected. That's why going back to a familiar relationship that lacks peace, vision, and spiritual alignment is not just a bad decision, it's a dangerous one. It places you in emotional bondage and clouds your discernment. Every time you tolerate dysfunction, you delay healing. Every time you excuse behavior that breaks your spirit, you train your soul to settle for survival instead of thriving. Dysfunction is not always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. It comes in the form of cycles, repeated conversations, broken promises, and emotional manipulation disguised as passion. But anything that consistently robs you of clarity, joy, and spiritual growth is not love. It's bondage. You were not created to be someone's emotional project or their part-time piece. You are a temple of purpose. and anything connected to you should be contributing to your growth, not pulling you into regression. It's time to unlearn the idea that struggle is a sign of love. Yes, all relationships have challenges, but there's a difference between growing pains and spiritual suffocation. There's a difference between working through difficulties and constantly bleeding from the same wounds. Love is not supposed to make you lose yourself. It's supposed to sharpen you, elevate you, and point you back to your God-given identity. If you have to shrink, hide, compromise your values, or sacrifice your peace to keep someone, then you are not in love. You are in captivity. The people God assigns to your life will not require you to tolerate chaos to prove your loyalty. They will bring order, stability, and mutual purpose. So don't let emotional history blind you to spiritual reality. Just because someone has been part of your journey doesn't mean they're meant for your destination. Familiar doesn't mean healthy. And what's familiar can sometimes be the very thing holding you back from stepping fully into what God has prepared for you. You must stop confusing comfort with culling. God doesn't call you to what's easy. He calls you to what aligns with His purpose in you. And sometimes that means leaving what's familiar so He can lead you into what's divine. You are not obligated to stay connected to anyone who continues to injure your soul under the name of love or loyalty. Dysfunction may have been your history, but it does not have to be your future. So when the past calls, offering the same cycle, wrapped in the same words, remind yourself, you're not called to comfort, you're called to clarity. Relationships are spiritual alignments, not just emotional connections. Too often we approach relationships with our feelings, but forget that every connection carries spiritual weight. It's not just about how someone makes you feel, it's about how they affect your soul. Who you connect with will either push you closer to God's purpose or slowly pull you away from it. You cannot afford to treat relationships casually when your calling is sacred. Every person you allow close to your heart has the power to influence your vision, your pace, your values, and your direction. Many people fall into the trap of measuring relationships only by emotion. We have history, they say, or they've always been there for me. But history is not the same as alignment. Support is not the same as spiritual agreement. Someone can be present in your life and still be in conflict with the path God has set before you. They may not be evil, they may not be manipulative, but they may be completely misaligned with your purpose. And when two people are not aligned, even love becomes heavy. Even peace feels temporary, because spiritual misalignment causes friction that emotion cannot fix. God doesn't join people based on convenience. He joins people based on assignment. That means not every connection is meant to stay. Some people were divine for a season, but when the assignment shifts, the relationship must shift too. Holding on to people who no longer walk in the same spiritual direction can create resistance in your journey. You begin to feel stuck, delayed, or even spiritually confused. And often, it's not because you're out of God's will, but because you're yoked to someone who isn't walking in it. First of all, the union. This is why the Bible speaks so clearly about being unequally yoked. That's not just about marriage or dating. It's about any relationship that joins your life to someone else's rhythm. A yoke is something that connects two animals for movement. If one is stronger, slower, or unwilling, the journey becomes difficult. In the same way, when you're yoked to someone who doesn't see what God shows you, who doesn't carry the weight of spiritual responsibility, or who doesn't honor the values you live by, you're walking in constant drag. And that drag wears down your spirit. People don't just bring emotions, they bring atmospheres. They bring energy, belief systems, habits, and spiritual residue. And if you're not discerning, you'll allow someone to get close who is carrying confusion in their spirit and wonder why you feel heavy every time you speak to them. Relationships should sharpen you, not weaken you. They should stir your passion for purpose, not make you question it. They should bring accountability, not chaos. Alignment brings ease. It brings clarity. It brings mutual growth. Some relationships feel deep because they trigger strong emotions. But deep doesn't always mean divine. There are soul ties that can feel like love but are rooted in trauma, insecurity, or fear of being alone. Those connections may feel intense, but they do not produce fruit. And you will know a connection by its fruit. Does it make you pray more or pull you into compromise? Does it bring you closer to peace or closer to anxiety? Does it help you rise or make you feel like you're always rescuing the other person from their own decisions? Spiritual alignment is not perfection, it's agreement. Agreement on values, agreement on vision, agreement on the necessity of growth, purpose, and obedience to God. When alignment is there, there's mutual flow even in hard times. There's a sense of peace because both hearts are submitted to the same spirit. But when it's absent, even good moments feel unstable. You'll be left constantly asking, is this really where I'm supposed to be? So if you find yourself drawn to old relationships based only on how they made you feel, but not on where they led you, pause. Feelings fade, but alignment sustains. God connects people for purpose, not nostalgia. Your destiny is too valuable to risk on emotional connections that don't carry spiritual agreement. Choose alignment, and you will preserve your peace. Growth requires separation from anything that stunts your purpose. As painful as it may be, separation is often the first sign that you are being elevated. You cannot grow and stay the same. You cannot pursue your destiny and hold tightly to everything and everyone that was part of your history. There comes a time when you must choose between your future and your familiarity. And that decision often looks like letting go of relationships that no longer reflect the version of you that God is shaping. Not all separation is rejection. Some separation is divine. It is God's way of pruning your life so that you can bear more fruit. When a gardener prunes a tree, he doesn't cut off branches out of anger. He does it so the tree can grow stronger, fuller, healthier. Likewise, God removes people and situations that once served you, but now hinder you. That relationship that once seemed supportive may now be suffocating your vision. That person you once trusted may now be a distraction, pulling your focus away from what God is requiring of you in this season. Growth is not always loud. Sometimes it's silent choices. Deciding not to return that text, not to re-enter that conversation, not to revisit that place in your heart that God has already healed. It's not bitterness, it's boundaries. And boundaries are not walls to keep people out, they are gates to protect what God is building inside of you. When you start to understand your value and the weight of your calling, you stop entertaining anything that compromises your peace, your clarity, or your standards. The reason some people cannot grow is because they're still tied to relationships that feed their weakness instead of their strength. They stay connected to those who comfort their excuses but never challenge their potential. And as long as you stay in circles that celebrate the old you, you'll never step into the future God designed for you. The old relationships, the familiar cycles, the emotional patterns, they become like anchors. And anchors aren't evil, they're just not meant to move. You can't soar while being anchored to what no longer belongs in your flight. Separation is not about being better than anyone else. It's about being obedient to what God has spoken. Some people won't understand your shift. They'll call it pride, coldness, or betrayal. But what they don't see is the weight you carry, the private prayers you've prayed, the dreams you're stewarding. You cannot explain your growth to people who are not growing. You cannot defend your decision to leave what God told you to leave. Maturity requires you to be okay with being misunderstood. There are people who are more in love with your potential than your process. They liked you when you were broken because they could relate to you. But now that you're healing, evolving, and stepping into purpose, they feel threatened. They feel distant. And that's okay. Everyone cannot go where you're going. Growth will reveal who is aligned and who is just attached. There's a difference. Alignment is spiritual, is God ordained. Attachment is emotional. It's often fear-based. Growth exposes both. Sometimes your growth will be the very thing that causes others to walk away. And that's part of the process. It's God's way of clearing the path so that your vision becomes sharper and your focus becomes stronger. You were not created to stay in one stage. You were not designed to stay small just to keep others comfortable. God is calling you to more. And more always demands release. Release of old mindsets, release of limiting beliefs, and yes, release of relationships that no longer fit where you're headed. So, if God is leading you to separate, don't resist the process. Trust that what He's removing, He's replacing. What He's cutting, He's cultivating. Growth may feel lonely, but it's never empty. God always fills the space with something better, something higher, something aligned with your true identity. Let Him. In the journey of purpose, you will be required to make difficult decisions, not out of hatred, but out of alignment. Walking away from old relationships is not about arrogance or bitterness. It's about obedience to the calling on your life. When God begins to elevate you, He also begins to separate you. Not because you're better, but because you're becoming. And becoming requires clarity, maturity, and the courage to let go of anything that no longer carries your future. Never forget, what God removes, He replaces. What He separates, He sanctifies. And what He ends, He does so with a divine intention to protect your destiny. So don't look back with regret, look forward with resolve. You are not called to cycles. You are called to impact. You are not called to emotional survival. You are called to spiritual significance. Trust God enough to honor what He has ended. Trust yourself enough to walk in that freedom. And trust the process enough to know that your next is greater than anything you've left behind. Growth may cost you relationships, but it will give you back your purpose. Good luck on your journey forward. Protect your peace. Walk boldly in your calling. And never settle for what God already told you to leave. Thank you for listening, and may your next chapter be filled with divine alignment, unshakable purpose, and lasting peace.